YouTube and all subscribing platforms, the flagship of which is Rumble. So you're welcome to check out the program. You can chat with us. You can call in if you'd like. I'll give out the number, 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958. Michael D. Shaw is with us. And Michael is a science writer. He's written over 500 blogs and columns on Substack, which is where he publishes now. Mike, how are you?
Hey, just fine, just fine.
You know, Mike, I thought I'd bring up something that was just on my mind pretty much from my program yesterday, which I did with David. And David's a regular guest of mine. He's kind of I don't know if you've ever seen him, but
I think I have, actually.
Yeah, he's kind of a millennial, and he's certainly a liberal, and he travels among left-leaning circles. And we were talking about the nomination of Supreme Court Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Boy, did I have a lot to say about that.
I knew you would,
Yeah.
as do I. But I want to just give you a thought that I have about his comments on it, which were that people that he knows, and I shouldn't talk for Americans, he tells me, because people in his circles and people on the left and people who are under 30, not only do they not care about, things like being tough on crime, and, they actually are more lenient. They want to get rid of prisons, or they want to reduce prison populations. But, on the issue of whether or not there's such a thing as a woman, she was asked about by Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's been a guest on my show, by the way.
All right.
They agree with her that these things are old-fashioned, and that now there is no more such a thing as a woman, I suppose, assumably of a man either. And that all of these things are now, in the pocket of judgment and not science. It's like, well, you are whatever you are. And that this, in fact, is now the law. And then he pointed to the Biden administration, assumedly making reference to, Barbara Levine, or whatever her name is. And this is now the law of the land. This is what we now accept. And there's no turning back. This is it. We're here. And that that I'm out of touch. I'm old. I don't understand, the new mores. And that I really am not speaking for the majority of Americans anymore, but it is I who is on the fringe.
Well, let me comment on that a couple of ways.
Yeah.
Let's give this guy his first premise, which he's obviously wrong in a couple of ways. One is, I don't believe that people of that age group in any substantial numbers believe what he said. Mm-hmm. But even if you want to go that route and not worry about tough on crime, not worry about what a woman is, one issue seems to have escaped most commentators on this. She's basically an idiot, all right? And I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. When you're in constitutional law, that basically consists of knowing the Constitution and knowing a lot of case law. That's it. It's not that hard, all right?
Right.
One of the most substantial cases, if you really care about women's rights, comes from 1996, called the U.S. versus Virginia, which is the case that stopped the male-only policy at the Virginia Military Institute. Mm-hmm. She said she was not familiar with that case.
Yes.
All right. So I'm asking you, forget about being a Supreme Court justice. Forget about being an appeals court justice. Forget even about being a federal judge. How do you go through law school and not know that case? Oh, I'll tell you what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak freely about this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously an affirmative action individual, but the mistake they made was, maybe based on her limited mental capacity, they gave her a very short guide on what she needed to know for this thing. Because, yeah, she gave all the politically correct answers about there's no definition of a woman and so on and so forth. But how do you graduate Harvard Law School? How do you get put on the federal bench and on the appeals court and not know major case law?
Right. Well, I would even extend it and point out that she denied even knowing the cases that she herself had written. Oh, I'd have to, and look, I think she does know these cases. She knows them all full well. She's brilliant. She's not stupid. She probably did. I don't take that away from her. I think she earned her place at Harvard Law.
No, hang on. She was questioned about that case.
She just denied knowing anything about it, but she knows about it. She was lying.
I know, but come on. How do you deny that?
Because she didn't want to have to go into a certain,
all that case showed was you can't discriminate against women.
Yeah, but if she was to open up that can of worms, that would have made her have to admit that there is such a thing as a woman. And very wealthy people now in our establishment, people like that notorious Hungarian billionaire, we're not going to mention his name, and this Southern group that calls itself by the name of poverty, and
right,
some of the richest, most powerful people in the world.
Okay, so what you're saying,
they have decided that there's no such thing as men and women.
But here's the point. This then
doesn't want to go up
and give you that premise. Let me give you that premise. All right. So she's willing to appear as an imbecile because that's what Massa told her to do.
No, well, actually, she's appearing as an imbecile because she wants to try to come across, even though it's damaging, as kind of an all-American, middle-of-the-road person who's not, she starts out, I love this country and all that kind of nonsense. And she does not want to go into a hole where she's going to have to be exposed as a radical leftist, which she is, in my opinion. That's what it's about. So she's willing to take a few lumps in order to not open a door, which will open up some inquiry.
That's a very good point. But
no.
To what extent do you humiliate yourself to fit into this pattern?
There's no pride. I mean, it's just getting through this thing. She wants to keep her head low. They're not going to do like the left does to, conservative nominees, like look at the yearbook, and start to ask them whether or not they like beer and whether or not a term means flatulence, which is what they did to Kavanaugh. But instead, with her case, it's her record. And she and the White House, by the way, has gone to great lengths to suppress her record. They will not release apparently reams of documents when she was the head of the Sentencing Commission under Obama, when she worked for the Obama Attorney General's office. All of this stuff, they are refusing to release it to the committee. And they're just going to try to tough it out. Now, I'm not sure that Biden even knew, or whoever's in charge of this administration, anything about her anyway. And by the way, they have been not fair. I mean, in all fairness, they haven't been fair to her because, I was listening to Steve Bannon talk about this. He noted that when he was in the Trump White House, he was on the team that prepped Neil Gorsuch for the hearings.
Right.
And he said that this, and even Obama's two appointees and Bush's two appointees, there's a process where they prep them and they go into their record and they look at things that are going to be problematic and they figure out things they can say and they develop strategies and they do a mock hearing where they ask them tough questions. They didn't do any of that for her. Biden just tossed her out there. Oh, you'll be fine. Nobody's going to question you. You're a Black woman. No one's going to say anything. You'll be fine. Just go through it. And so in a way, their incompetence and their stupidity, it's the same thing they did with Afghanistan. I mean, they've got these idiots around them who are running the country who just are in some kind of a bubble. They don't think that they have to, they're not serious people.
Well, I mean, how did they choose her compared to any number of garden variety Black female federal judges? Because
she's on the left and because she, they have made this cynical deal. And this is another thing I got into with David, where they said, well, we're going to appoint, quote, a Black woman, unquote. And they don't, they think that this is like, it's very condescending and it's playing, they think that Black people are going to go, oh, good, we're empowered because they picked a Black woman. They think that this kind of tokenism and this sort of arrogant political posturing really means something to people when it really doesn't. Maybe it did 10 years
Let's
ago.
talk about that for a second. All right. I mean, you're out there more than I am.
Yeah.
The fact that we take some random, and I'm saying not very well qualified, in my humble opinion, Black female judge, just so we can, scratch off a box.
Right.
How does that come across in the Black community?
Well, in their old way of looking at the world, they think it helps. They don't realize that Black people don't really care that much about this. Black people care about the same thing white people care about: how to get a job, the cost of hamburger, the security of their country, the fact that we are on the verge of World War III. They don't care if they're putting in a Black person in some position. That's not going to help your average Black person on the street who's dealing with drug gangs and shootings. They're so out of touch. This is such a left-wing, liberal, suburban, upper class, snobbish way of looking at the world. People don't think in those terms anymore. Maybe they did 20 years ago, fine. Obama, that was a big deal. A Black man as president. I get that. But the thing is, I think people have moved on from that now. They're worried about what's actually happening to Black people, not putting some fancy, person in a high position and saying, look, we're good to Black people. It's like, it's not really, it shows how tone deaf they are. And also, I mean, look, I do think she's qualified, and I don't question that.
Well, I do, but why do you think she's qualified?
Because she is experienced and she's bright and she's been around and she's been held. She's as qualified as anyone else. The problem.
So you're saying that she was lying about not knowing that case?
Yes, I think that she's a radical. The fact that she would not answer the question of what is a woman, that shows that she's a radical. She's part of this ultra left elitist agenda that's trying to change the nature of humanity in the most basic way. And that she doesn't want to, she's trying to position herself as, the middle of the road, to get through the confirmation. And so she's willing to lie and she's willing to look stupid because she thinks that's going to be less damaging than if she really comes out and tells the truth.
Well, see, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
That she made what she thought was a brilliant point on why she gave light sentences to these child pornography people.
Mm-hmm.
She made a big point of the fact that, well, if you're on the internet, within a matter of minutes, you can download thousands of images. Well, guess what, babe? In a matter of seconds, I can put a gun to someone's head and blow their brains out.
Oh, that answer was even more infuriating because I think she's made it worse. She's actually not only condoning it, but she's saying, oh, well, everyone's doing it. It reminds me of this. I mean, I don't want to go into an anecdote here, but a Planned Parenthood person, when my daughter was in school and they were introducing sex education and they had a meeting for parents. And I attended this meeting and they had this woman come out who from Planned Parenthood at the end. And she was really bizarre anyways, but she says, well, there's sex everywhere. There's sex in the movies. There's sex on television. There's sex on the billboards. There's sex in the magazine. So why not have it in school? I mean, it's, that kind of reasoning. And, it's actually so since everyone else is doing it, that's the way the world is right now. But the thing is, it gets to I think that this is very damaging for the Democratic Party and for the left and for.
I hope so.
Because I think that David is wrong. I think most people in this country, including most Democrats and most liberals, are not that far left at this point. They don't like leniency for child sex offenders and pornographers. They don't like the idea that women are being supplanted by guys in wigs. They don't like this stuff generally, even if they don't. They may publicly say they do, but they don't. And I think that there's a possibility, it's a slim possibility, that Democrats who are facing re-election, especially in the Senate, people like what's his name from Arizona, Mark Kelly, right?
Yeah.
Or some others, they're going to be pretty hard. It's going to be pretty hard for them to vote for this nominee.
Well, Manchin came out and said he's going to vote for her.
I know he did. And that's not good. But the thing is that I think that as as the thing moves along, and if we can slow it down, and as more and more Americans become aware of what the hell is going on here, it's going to be very toxic for them to vote for this nominee. And they may end up contacting the White House and saying, listen, you're going to have to cut your losses here. And I think that under normal circumstances, you have had Supreme Court nominees withdrawn for a lot less than this. I mean, remember
Carswell and there were
Carswell, but even that's right. But even more recently, I think that
Harriet Miers, who was
Harriet Miers for Bush,
yeah.
And there was this other guy who had smoked pot or something. He was like a Harvard. Ginsburg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a couple of others like that, for minor things. I mean, that's nothing. Yeah. And they were withdrawn. So I think that there is a slight possibility that she might be withdrawn because the Democrats are going to say, look, we are in trouble in November anyways. We're probably going to lose both houses. We can't afford to have this kind of thing hanging over us where we're going to be accused of supporting leniency for child molesters. That's not good news. I mean, that's not good for anybody. Nobody wants to have that one rung around their neck. And if they vote for
the other side of this
rung around their necks.
The other side of this, which I found funny, was they showed clips from MSNBC that had to do with a couple of the senators telling her to her face she's not credible.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not remember so and so and so and so? All right. Well, Katie bar the door. How dare you say to a black female that you're not credible?
Well, that's what
the people making those comments were white, by the way.
Well, that's what they're depending on. How can you criticize a person who happens to be a black woman? That's the cynical approach that they're taking, and I don't think it's going to work. Plus, the fact is that Lindsey Graham, I thought, very well brought up the fact that I think Bush appointed a black woman to the Circuit Court of Appeals of Washington, D.C., and they filibustered that for 2 years, and one of the big filibusters was Biden. So,
she was too conservative.
That's right. Well, that's the whole point. It has nothing to do with black woman. Right. And the criticism of her has nothing to do with her being a black
woman. But you
woman.
don't see one.
People couldn't care less.
Media outlet.
If this wasn't Zola Foster or the late Mildred Jefferson, there's two black women that one of whom I knew personally, they would have been confirmed in a heartbeat by conservatives. There's nothing to do with race. It's obviously that she's a radical leftist.
Well, I mean, you see, this just goes into the general quality of everything going down. It used to mean something, maybe. I don't even know how far back it goes, to be a Supreme Court justice. Now it's just 1,000% political.
Well, the reason it's become so political is because the Supreme Court has become so powerful, especially since Earl Warren, where they can make a decision that can change the whole country overnight. They can do, I mean, the power that they hold at this point is so awesome. It's sort of, I mean, there's a couple of other nexuses of power like that in this country. One of them I would argue is the Federal Reserve, but that's another subject. But the point is that it is important. So there's a huge fight now for someone to get in that court, because especially somebody like Brown Jackson, because she's only like 50 years old. I mean, she could be there for another 40, 50 years. And she's going to be in that room, and her thinking on things and her writing and her action can have a huge impact on our lives. I mean, it's an enormous power. It's a power that's illegitimate, but it's a power that the Supreme Court has gradually gathered into itself, not just with Warren. I mean, it goes back to the founding of the country. I mean, they've always, you have, the Taney decision, which legalized slavery, and the Dred Scott decision, that was a gross seizure of judicial power. So you have, I mean, it's a tendency, it's a balance of powers issue. But the point is that the balance has now become so out of whack that their power is institutionalized. It's not even questioned at this point.
Well, then you go into individual motivation. All right. So how does someone like that feel that she's removed from the society that she's screwing up? You know, what ivory tower does she live in that her life isn't going to be affected by being light on pedophiles?
Well,
she doesn't have any. Well, no, but she does have kids, right?
I think she does.
Yeah.
But of course, she probably lives in one of these well-to-do gated communities somewhere that, you know, it's like John Roberts. I mean, any of these guys, they're not in the real world. They don't have to deal with, you know, stepping out their door and having drug gangs in a shooting match. You know, they don't have to deal with having sexual molesters put in their neighborhoods. You know, they don't get put in the neighborhoods of the Ketanji Browns. They get put in the neighborhoods of people like you and I. They just are removed. There's a double standard. There's a two-tiered system. They don't have to observe the laws that they put in place. Those are for the rest of us lumpen proletarians. They don't, you know, they ride above it. I mean, it's, you know, the fact that she's so lenient on pedophiles, let's be honest, that's what this is. I mean,
yeah.
Rapists, because when you have sexual, you know, activity with a child, that's rape. You know, that's because a child can't consent. You know, I mean, I know that, look, I'm going to go a little controversial here and just state that I'm not a supporter of the QAnon theory, right? I mean, to me, I don't support anything that we don't know the name of the people. And I think,
right.
And I think they went way off the deep end. However, one of the basic premises of their theory was that the elitists, there's a pedophile ring amongst the elitists of the world. And they mentioned people like Jeffrey Epstein, who clearly was, but they also claim other people and they mention names, which I'm not endorsing.
Right.
But the fact that she was so lenient to pedophiles, it kind of raises those questions. What is this about? Are they trying to legitimize? And there was one case where she took this guy who had attacked a child sexually, and he was up for a sentence of something like 27 months or 30 months. She reduced it down to 3 months. And then she apologized to him and his family.
Oh, yes.
Oh, they're going to have trauma because of his image now. It's too bad. Like hell, what about the trauma of the child who was raped? And what about their family? I mean, this is like, there's something really
So why does someone
sinister
think
about
like
this.
that? What is diseased in her brain that comes up with this kind of
Because it might be a part of this agenda on the part of the elites of the world. And again, I don't want to go conspiracy here, you know, but facts are facts, to legitimize pedophilia. Look, there was a conference. I remember the late Dr. Judith Reisman on my program spoke about and wrote about this conference that was held in Montreal. I think it was probably sometime in the 90s, where you had a group of sexologists and sociologists and smart people get together and literally talk about legitimizing pedophilia over time.
Right.
And they mentioned that they would change the idea and the image of pedophilia from being a perversion to being an orientation, right? Like a sexual orientation. And when you call something an orientation, you're basically saying, well, this person can't do anything about it. They were born that way, right? I mean, they oriented that way. And it was a strategy to begin to legitimize this kind of thing. So I don't think you can dismiss out of hand that Ketanji Brown Jackson is at least influenced by this idea. I mean, and again, we're operating in a vacuum here because we can't really explain, we don't really know. And I'm not claiming I do know, but we can't really know the inner workings either of her mind or of that of people like her. But I would say on a conventional level, liberals, people on the left conventionally, whatever happened to the Me Too movement? Where are the pussy hat protesters?
Funny
Why aren't they storming her house?
you mention that because you always end these shows by saying, what's my next article? And it's going to be called What Do Women Want? And we're going to be looking at these issues,
Yeah,
obviously making reference to Freud, who was very famous for, he wasn't the first, but that it's all tied up. And how come women aren't speaking out about this?
exactly. I mean, we're talking about molesting probably predominantly girls by these guys, these older guys, and she's letting them off the hook. I'm sorry, but where are the mothers? Where are, where's Linda Sassor? I don't know, where's Madonna?
Is this tied in with this, let's open it all up here?
She called for burning the White House
Yeah.
when Trump was elected because he had made some stupid private comment that was caught on tape and he apologized for. But now you have somebody who is giving a light sentence to people who actually did the stuff that Trump was talking about. But, and I mean, where's Madonna now? I want to know, Madonna, where are you? Where are you on Ketanji Brown? I wonder.
I think that their problem is they can't get specific. I mean, it comes down to, and maybe people can call in and tell me I'm full of it, but there were so many women, and I met a number of otherwise conservative women who said they wouldn't vote for Trump in 2020 because he was too mean.
Oh, I see.
Right.
So if you do it with a nice phony British accent and you smile and you speak in wonderful sounding colloquials, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's great,
And the women aren't speaking.
What does that say about women? I mean, how
I'm sorry, but that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, it says it doesn't speak well toward women's intellect if they're, that's why I'm not voting for him because he's a mean orange man. Now we're on the verge of World War III. We have Biden, and he's not doing anything to bring about peace in Russia and Ukraine. Instead, he's talking about food shortages and possible nuclear attacks. And but he's nice. He doesn't, but which, by the way, he actually isn't.
He's not nice.
I know he's actually at least as mean as Trump. And to talk about, you ask him a tough question, his head blows up. Trump could answer questions quite nicely comparatively.
I remember a couple of months before the 2020 election, we went out with this couple. The guy's been a federal employee for 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's conservative, although he keeps quiet about it at work. The wife worked for a long time for United Airlines and retired. She's reasonably conservative, I think. And she shocked everyone at this brunch that I'm sitting with my wife and these two. When she goes into, I'm not voting for Trump because he's mean, her own husband was shocked. And I said, wait a minute, you're kidding, right? Oh, no.
He's mean.
And her husband's looking at her like, so you don't mind the higher taxes and whatever it's going to come along here? And I encountered that 2 days ago. The woman on the treadmill next to me, again, sounding sort of conservative in what she was saying. And then she makes it, well, of course, Trump was a bully and I couldn't vote for him.
And it's a sad commentary on women. I'm sorry, but especially these suburban, predominantly white women,
yes,
are the epitome of privilege, and who live in this world. I mean, look, I could give you stories too about this. I mean, I saw women have complete meltdowns after Trump won, and I mean physical meltdowns. They were falling over in rage, and they were like in a ball of jelly. I mean, they were screeching. And there's no rational reason for that. I know I've kind of implied this before, Mike, when we've talked about this, and I'm actually working on this for my latest book, which is called The Biden Coup. In that I do believe that there's a possibility, and I'm not saying I can prove it, I can't, and it's a speculation, that after many, many decades of experimentation on the part of psychiatrists, psychologists in broad mind control techniques on a societal level, something that governments have striven to do since the beginning of time, something that the Nazis brought up to a very high art, and I get into that, that they have manipulated people by use of their control, informal control of the mass media, of the
Operation Mockingbird.
That's right, exactly, and that they have learned techniques that have been so successful that now you have people who don't even know why they're so upset or emotional. They can't articulate why they didn't like Trump, for example, in any rational way. I mean, they would stop blubbering about some, irrational thing. I mean, there's something, people have been touched in a certain way. It's almost like something manipulating people's emotions on a mass scale. Now, there's enough of us like you and I and people we know who are not manipulated, but your average person doesn't have access to, they're not like conscious. I mean, they're not like, they're kind of driven by entertainment, by emotion, by whatever feels good, and they go, and they also, there's a lot of social acceptance that they seek. People crave that. They don't want to step out of line. There's a price to be paid when you step out of line. So people kind of internalize this stuff after a while. I think it's starting in elementary school. That's why they're fighting so hard to seize the elementary schools.
I think you're right, but what happens to these people, because I've seen them as they get older. My own father proclaimed to be liberal, but I would occasionally bring up points knowing that these were hot button issues. And he would only get mad because he knew I was right. But he was so formed in that, well, here was the greatest example. You may remember, you were probably very young. In the early 1960s, there was a big attack against the John Birch Society.
Yes.
Started portraying it as anti-Semitic,
right, which was
fascist.
A lie, by the way. I looked into that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I asked my father, I said, all right, the three main precepts at that time, of the John Birch Society was impeach Earl Warren and
the US, right?
And get the US out of the UN.
Yeah.
And the so-called Liberty Amendment, which was for a radical reform of income tax.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, with all due respect, which of those three are wrong? And his head exploded.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah. So I think that they get programmed, and it's very important to not get programmed, because the deprogramming is extremely painful. And to be able to red pill somebody, as they call it now,
that's right,
is difficult.
Well, people don't want to give up. I mean, once you get in it, it's like a cult. I'm not saying in the formal sense, but it's hard to step out of it because you have so much invested in it. I get that. I mean, look, I don't give a damn because I'm not on any kind of fast track at this point in my life. I don't have to try to be in the corporate world. I'm not in a college where I have to get great grades and meet people and go up any kind of ladder. I don't give a shit, to be blunt. So I can say whatever the hell I want to say. And even in my case, I've had to use a pseudonym, that. But I can appreciate where you get some young person at a college and their parents are spending 70, 80 grand a year, and they want to make something out of their life and they want to get up the ladder. They want to get a good position later. They want to have a future, and they get the message early on that they have to kowtow to the left. And if they don't, they're going to get punished. They always hold up, and as an example, someone for what they called during the Spanish Inquisition an auto da fe, a public humiliation and denouncement, and often violence against them. And they're destroyed. And so they keep
with all due respect, there were probably more legitimate reasons during the Spanish Inquisition than there are now.
I don't know about that.
I'm not justifying that, but
No, I'm not sure about that one. But the point is that I use as an example to show that the social pressure is extreme. And plus, people want to be successful. They want to have the girlfriend. They want to get invited to the nice parties.
but would you really
They
want
want
a
to have
girlfriend?
fun.
Would you really want a girlfriend that you could only get by lying about yourself?
Well, some of these girls are pretty good, but anyway, putting that aside, no, the fact is that you internalize this stuff. You convince yourself. You surrender parts of your own consciousness at some point, and you become this. I've seen people transform in that
And it
way.
doesn't work long term.
No, it doesn't, but it works in the short term. These aren't long-term thinkers. These are people who they're dealing on the temporal plane. They want to have the goodies in the world.
Well, let me tell you about a related experience I had. This is years ago. And I was visiting my dealer in England. Maybe it turned out it was like a week before Christmas. So their daughter of this couple was in some a pageant at the local church.
Mhm.
And the wife and the daughter get out of the car and they do whatever they're doing. And all of a sudden, it was like the Twilight Zone. It's just him and me in the car now for a minute. And his personality changes. Mike, I don't think I can keep up with this anymore. This is all phony. I can't relate to any of this. This isn't me. Why am I here? And then boom, he goes back into his other personality.
Ha!
It
That's-
was freaking weird.
Well, there's a lot of this sort of this. It's like a Sibylline, aspect of multiple personalities.
I mean, so it's weird. And then I've seen a side of this guy. So then after this pageant, the wife and the daughter are in there, and I'm like, I have to act somehow. But I suspect that a lot of these people end up being very unhappy because they sold their soul.
Well, the thing is, I think they just become this. I mean, look when you say this, I realize that I can be a little bit of a different person in certain situations because I have to be, but I'm conscious of it. I know who I'm around and I know what you can do. And I've seen what happens if I don't. So I basically conform.
But you're not doing that 100% of the time.
No, I come up here, I do my show, and I'm not doing it at all. But I do it sometimes in order to get through various social situations.
Well, I mean, everybody does.
We all do it to an extent, but I know what you mean. It's like it's an extreme lack of an internal life, really, or a lack of awareness of who they are. Everything. It's almost like people are walking holograms. They're just they're projecting other things than who they are. And so to go back to this idea like that, what David was saying, I mean, that he says that this, the Ketanji Brown stuff is going to be fine because that's where most Americans are, in his opinion.
How can he possibly believe that?
Because that's who he travels. Those are the circles he lives in, what he called a very blue district in Detroit. And that's the way people are, and that's who they elect. I pointed out to him that, you could end up electing somebody like AOC, but that can only happen in very select areas. That's not going to make it in a state or in a national election.
So this is a replay of that famous Pauline Kael story.
Which is?
She was a movie critic,
Mm-hmm.
and she was very politically liberal. And when Nixon won the election,
Yes.
her comment was, I just don't understand it. I don't know anyone who voted for Nixon.
Exactly. That's what it is. They operate in this kind of rarefied world, and it's not the bigger world. And I think
Isn't that very boring? I mean, when I was coaching Pop Warner football,
very safe, right?
when I was coaching Pop Warner football, I thought it was an enriching experience up to a point,
Mhm.
that we would go all over this part of LA. And some of these, let's be honest, were pretty rough and tumble neighborhoods
Right.
we ended up in, but at least they'd encounter some of the other kids from
Sure.
other socioeconomic groups. And, the kids got along and so on, but they were exposed to different elements of society.
Right.
While I wouldn't want to hang out with these people long term, I think the exposure
It was good for
was
everybody.
important.
Yeah, sure. It's good for all sides.
But
You
on
get
the
to know
other
each other a little bit, and they see
the
that.
David character seems like he stays in his bubble.
I think you're probably right, but and he's into some rather bizarre, in my opinion, unusual things about Judaism that he's talked about, which I don't agree with. But I'd love to get a rabbi to come on maybe with us sometime and go over some of that. But putting that all aside, to get back to Katanji, I hope that what she represents, and it's clearly coming out, does not comport to mainstream America. I think she's a fringe. I think it's
No, I don't think it will, because there's certain lines that can't be crossed, in my humble opinion. And there may be a more, and this is probably the wrong word, open attitude than there used to be toward incest, in that it's at least talked about.
Is that right?
But I don't think the average person is in favor of incest. Okay, because
I don't think so either. Although 20 years from now, I'm not so sure. Maybe that'll be the next frontier. I don't know. Seems like pedophilia is the latest.
I don't think they're going to succeed with that. I think there are more sexual perverts than we would care to admit.
Right.
I think that for reasons that I don't quite understand yet, they seem to be concentrated in higher elements of society.
Right.
It's always the leadership of the movie industry from day one. I mean, no one disputes that.
No, I think that's true. And that's the QAnon theory, right? That these perverts, as you call them, I think accurately, they are at the top echelon, not only of entertainment and Hollywood, but of business, of government, of economy. I mean, the top, kind of corporate people. I mean, in other words, what Elizabeth Warren once referred to as the millionaires and the billionaires, people who are giving you a rigged, they're rigging things. She made reference, and the top 1%. And again, I'm generalizing here, but maybe it has to do with the fact that when you reach that level of material success and that level of power, you become corrupted. I don't know. It's like you become out of touch with your basic humanity.
Well, in the movie 8mm, which you may have seen,
I didn't.
Nicolas Cage, it had to do with an alleged snuff film that a very rich widow discovered among her late husband's things. And she hires him as a private investigator to see what the origin of this was. Was it legit? Anyway, you go through a bunch of stuff to find out, yes, it was legit. He had paid a lot of money for some girl to be killed on film, really killed on film.
Yeah.
And he just couldn't believe what was happening when he confronts the perpetrators who made the film, because the guy was dead who financed it. And he said, I don't understand. Why do it? Why did he do this? And the guy looked at him and said, because he could.
That's like Bill Clinton in his biography, right? Why did you mess around with Monica Lewinsky? Because I could.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
So if your tastes tend to run not just to having sex with a younger woman, I mean, she was 22, I think, Monica Lewinsky.
Right.
But to more pedophile type pursuits or even homicidal type pursuits.
Right.
There are people that can be overcome by these bad emotions.
Well, what you're talking about is the ultimate use of power.
Yeah.
Now, these are people who possess incredible levels of power, and they have no compunction of abusing it. There is a dark side to everyone, and they're in a position where they can do this and get away with it because they know they're so powerful. Nobody would dare challenge them. And they reach a point of corruption where they just, not to mention names, but there was a very famous couple, one of whom was president of the United States, who I think has been involved with some of these things. I'm not mentioning names. The point is that they reach a level of where not only are they powerful, but they're surrounded by people who emulate and revere them, and that they know how to play the game to get more power. And they become dismoored of any sense of morality, but also any sense of operating in the normal world of justice. They don't have to worry about those things anymore. They're never going to get caught. They become invincible.
And if somebody calls them on it, they end up slumped over a cannon in Fort Marcy Park.
Let's not go explicit here, but yes. And there's a lot of that. I mean, do you remember that television series on Netflix with Kevin Spacey? What was that called? The House of Cards. Did you watch that?
A couple of episodes, yeah.
I think that show described that kind of power, and I think that one of the guys that produced that show, Mankiewicz, his father had been the manager of Robert Kennedy and the Kennedy family,
right.
Who I think was a good guy, by the way. I don't think he was fine. I think, who knows? But the point is that he was expressing stuff in that show with that couple that he eventually becomes president, and just some of the things that they were doing. I think that was a glimpse into this kind of power. Not just in the presidency, but at the top levels of any of these people. It could be the top of a big company like Amazon. I'm not saying particular, but I'm just saying that people who reach that level of power, they got away with, in that case, murder. I mean, they got away with all kinds of things that normal people could never even dream of doing. But if a normal person was put in that position, they might be tempted to do it because they can, right?
Well, they can, but what about resisting temptation?
Well, that's right, but that's for all the rest of us, you see.
No, I'm saying resisting temptation for the strict moral reason.
But they become dismoored of morals because the power corrupts them. It's like what Lord Acton said, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you become drunk with power and ego, and you become addled. I mean, look what happened to King Solomon, right? I think we can look at biblical examples of this. This isn't new. After having 1,000 wives, he'd gone downhill. I mean, it was no longer dealing on the plane of morals. So power can do that. That's the lesson. And that's why, in a sense, the American experiment has been unique, because we're supposed to be a republic that is where the sovereign citizen is in a position to challenge power, and that power is limited by laws that are in a constitution. That's how the system is supposed to work. I mean, the question is, have we dipped too far in the direction of consolidating that kind of power? I mean, in my new book, The Biden Coup, I trace it back to the election of 1912. You'll have to wait till I finish the book to read this, but I do think that we reached a tipping point at that time where the balance went out of whack, and it's been sliding out of whack ever since. In that we now do have the very thing that our founding generation tried to get rid of, an aristocracy, a group of people from different walks of life who do exercise that kind of power, and who do intersect with each other, who help each other, and who also intersect with like-minded aristocracies around the world. Look at the Ukraine thing. These are oligarchs on both sides, Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And guess who is doing business with the Ukrainian oligarchs, right? We don't want to mention names, but now we're going to go to war for them, to protect them. I remember when Bush was president, not to apologize, but remember when he got into Iraq, remember all the left was screaming for 8 years, the oil interests, right? They're making money on oil. Halliburton, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Bush lied, people died. Halliburton. We heard that. We've never heard the end of that. Are they talking about oil oligarchs now? And are they talking about certain American oligarchs who have made a lot of money and who've gained a lot of power in that country because they may have engaged in a coup d'etat over there? Not to mention Russia. Why is it only Russia and that has oligarchs? I don't think so. I think that there's a tendency for oligarchs to intersect with each other all over the world. I mean, they live in a whole world of their own. They don't give a goddamn about Ukrainians. 3 billion people pushed out of their homes. Who cares? They don't care about average people. Anyway, I'm trying to be euphemistic here because we're going on YouTube. So, Mike, what else is new?
Well, how do I follow that up? No, I would agree with that, and I think the problem is that as people struggle with their daily life and high gas prices, they can't really spend too much time thinking about these things. Although more's the pity that neither does the media. I mean, if you go back to the 70s and the big, what's your word for this, simus that was made about Watergate.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now, let's put that in context. Richard Nixon was ahead in the polls by at least 30 points, maybe more. But he was paranoid enough that for some reason, he had to arrange a break-in at the Democratic National Headquarters to get what exactly? What? Here is my plan for running against Dick Nixon. All right. So these two reporters from the Washington Post that, to be charitable, never did anything before or since. This becomes a huge story, Watergate. Well, there's a lot worse stuff going on now, and I don't see word one being reported. And even in a bizarre turn of events, where the New York Times finally admits that there was something to this Hunter Biden laptop thing, although conveniently several months too late, there's no media out there other than the alternative media. And that's a question I've always had in general.
Well, the media is completely in the bag. I mean, we always thought that the media was going to be the fifth estate, that there'd be independent journalists. And there are, but they're suppressed. I mean, we could name a few of them. I follow some of them, but they're not in the mainstream. And are not conservative people either. They're generally liberals. Doesn't matter. The point is that real journalism is completely been put in the bag. And I think that became more obvious than ever, obviously, in the Trump years. I mean, it's just, in researching my book, even, I'm going back and looking at articles about different things I want to write about, and they're so biased and hateful and filled with rage toward Trump. And and lying flat out and knowingly lying, that it really shows that we no longer have what the founders of the Republic thought would be a media that actually would be, investigating corruption in all aspects.
Well, what do you think the market is for, let's analyze that for a minute. Back in the day, you watched Walter Cronkite because there wasn't an internet.
Right.
And, even though some of us knew that he was a left-wing individual.
Yeah.
But that's all there was to watch. All right.
That's right.
And everybody watched that show. All right. My question is, why have a broadcast media now?
Well,
who is watching this?
The point is that there was a brief window of opportunity there where it looked like we were going to overcome the Walter Cronkite controlled media through the internet. All of a sudden, there was like people were being heard. And that when Trump won his election, that ended. They started to algorithm people. And eventually they finally went in for the kill on January 8th when they removed Trump himself from the social media.
Right.
And when they did that, they also removed hundreds of other people. They just disappeared. They went down the memory hole. And I mean, even like Breitbart, which is a major news outlet, they've got reporters in London and in Israel, and they've got it's a full-fledged new media outlet. They had their social network cut by about a third, and it wasn't an accident.
No.
This was, technical. There was decisions made. I mean, I cover in my book on the Biden coup that Zuckerberg had like a dinner meeting at his home in, I think, the summer of 2020, where they actually had people go in there. I'm not going to mention the names right now, but it's going to be in my book, where they actually discussed, this is how we're going to stop Trump. This is what we're going to set.
No, I understand that, but my question was more, who is watching conventional broadcast media now? Are there people that are stupid enough to think this is true? Are there people that are so addicted to, well, my parents watch the news every time? Why watch it?
Well, something, I think that the answer to that is that even if people don't watch it, it still has enough power. Like, for example, the New York Times. Who reads it? I mean, even outside of really New York City, and maybe it mailed to some other elitists around the world. But the point is that the New York Times still sets the tone for what is and isn't reported and how it's reported. Because
I'll tell
you why. Because every newsroom in the country reads it, and they follow it, and they take their marching orders. Every media outlet in the country, newspaper, radio, and television, get the New York Times, and they get their marching orders from the New York Times. So the New York Times itself, as a periodical, which people read, that doesn't have that much influence. It has influence because of the fact that it has this, it's been given this birth of power. And they're not the only ones. There are several others. And it's consolidated into a few hands. I mean, how many media outlets now are there? There's like 6 or 7 in this country. It's gone back to the days of Walter Cronkite. They are controlling. Walter Cronkite was controlled. He was a Mandarin who would march out and goose step and give the official line. He announced right after the Kennedy assassination, nothing to see here, just a lone gunman, right? And anybody who disagreed with that was denounced and attacked as a, quote, conspiracy theorist. And that's exactly what they did to Trump. I don't want to go into details here because this is YouTube. But, in my opinion, there was controlled media that decided this is what happened. Even though you saw something else, you didn't see it because we're telling.
But we're talking in circles here. I agree with all that. But how many times do they have to be proven wrong and corrupt before they lose influence?
Well, the thing is that, as the old saying goes back to the Bird Society, birds of a feather flock together. They don't care. I mean, they knew they were wrong and corrupt when they attacked Trump. Even Biden the other day in Europe repeated that lie, that piece.
The Nazi flags, yeah.
Yeah, or the business about Trump at Charlottesville. That was a hoax. I mean, that was a complete manufactured lie. And yet they're still going out there. They know it's not true, but it's like, oh, it's too good to let that go.
Well, they know it's not true. But if some Johnny Doorknob is reading the New York Times, why does he believe it anymore?
Because people, John Dewey, the educator, the so-called father of progressive education, talked about this. People have been conditioned over long periods of time. I mean, it's the Gramscian march through the institutions. They are conditioned to believe it, and they do. And they live in a world around it.
And if you tell someone that they're being programmed, they just...
they'll explode.
Yeah.
And what I say, because I want to sort of wrap it up, but what I would say is that when you're dealing with normies who don't want to look outside of this iron cage, you have to be very careful and very kind and very polite. Don't hit them over the head with something because it's only going to react. They'll only react. You have to introduce things very carefully and very strategically because you're going to get a lot further. I think Rush Limbaugh was actually a master at that. He was not.
You yourself a very kind individual.
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
I would freak out if I had to deal with some of these people.
Yeah, but I'm not always so kind, and I get goaded pretty. I can be very thin-skinned, but I try to be kind. You know, I try to do what I try to preach what I try to do as I'm preaching here, and it's not always easy. But
right.
my general advice is treat people with love and kindness, and introduce things to the level that they might be able to handle it. You know, it's sort of like you have to test that. But in the long run, people will wake up, I believe. I mean, I'm not
Well,
pessimistic.
that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic generally. You know, I think that truth will work its way out. They may have their holocausts, they may have their world wars, they might even drop a nuclear bomb, but eventually truth will come out. Anyway, Mike, what do you have coming up on Substack?
Well, I unfortunately got behind. I was posting every few days, and then the real world came in, my day job and so on. But I'm going to look more into this. We talked about a little bit, this women thing.
Yeah, yes.
How come they're not standing up?
Where's the pussy hats?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Where's the Me Too? I mean, they were complaining about, and rightfully, about Harvey Weinstein. What a scumbag.
Yeah.
Why are they letting a judge who gives a pass to people like Harvey Weinstein? Why are they giving this judge a pass? Really? Well, I think we could probably speculate, and I think we did.
Yeah.
But that's a question that we need to ask very gently and very carefully.
Yeah.
Anyways, Mike, thanks so much as always.
Well, good to see you. We'll re-up next week.
All right. Thanks a lot.